Karen called an emergency meeting to destroy me. Then I walked in with the truth. I never thought I'd have to defend my own dock. One quiet morning on Silver Creek Lake, sheriff deputies rolled onto my ranch because the HOA president claimed the only deep-water dock on the lake belonged to the community. The problem? My family had owned that land for decades. What started as a ridiculous accusation turned into a battle over property rights, hidden easements, old survey records, and a secret buried inside my father's barn. And by the time the truth came out, the people trying to control my lake were the ones standing outside a locked gate. If you enjoy stories about HOA overreach, land rights, and ordinary people standing their ground with facts instead of force, make sure you're subscribed. Because this one only gets crazier from here. I've lived on Silver Creek Lake long enough to know every sound it makes. The groan of dock boards under my boots, the splash of trout near the reeds, the distant rattle of a cattle gate when the Wyoming wind pushed through the valley. That Tuesday morning started like 100 others. I stood on the end of my father's dock with a mug of black coffee in my hand, watching the first sunlight spread across the water. My ranch sat on the eastern shore, 40 acres of pasture, pine trees, and shoreline that had belonged to my family for decades. The dock stretched into the deepest part of the lake. My father built it himself. Every board, every piling, every bolt. When he died, the property became mine. I'd spent years maintaining it, replacing worn planks and repairing storm damage. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid, reliable, like the man who built it. I was halfway through my coffee when I heard sirens. At first I thought somebody had crashed on County Road 18. Then I saw 2 sheriff's vehicles turning onto my gravel driveway. Dust rolled behind them. My stomach tightened. Sheriff deputies didn't come to remote ranches at 6:30 in the morning without a reason. I walked up from the shoreline as the vehicles stopped near my barn. 2 deputies stepped out. Both looked uncomfortable. That immediately told me something was off. "Morning," I said. The older deputy removed his sunglasses. "Mr. Walker?" "That's me. We received a complaint regarding unlawful restriction of community lake access." For a second, I honestly thought he was joking. "What community access?" Neither deputy answered immediately. Instead, both looked toward the road. A white SUV appeared a moment later. I recognized it instantly. Melissa Grant, president of the Silver Creek Lake HOA. The SUV rolled to a stop behind the patrol vehicles. Melissa stepped out carrying a folder thick with papers. She looked far too pleased for someone attending a police visit. "Thank you for coming, officers," she said before either deputy could speak. "This situation has gone on long enough." I crossed my arms. "What situation?" Melissa pointed directly toward my dock. "That dock." I stared at her. "My dock?" "Community members have reported repeated interference with lake access." The older deputy sighed. "Mrs. Grant claims the dock serves the entire lake community." I almost laughed. Almost. Because Melissa wasn't smiling. She was serious. Dead serious. "The dock belongs to the lake," she said. "It's a shared resource." "No," I replied. "It's on my property. The HOA has authority over lake facilities. The HOA doesn't own my ranch." Her expression hardened. Several months earlier, luxury homes had started appearing around Silver Creek Lake. Along with them came the HOA. Rules, committees, meetings, people who loved telling other people what to do. Until now, they'd mostly stayed on the western shoreline. Apparently that had changed. Melissa opened her folder. "We've reviewed the matter extensively." I looked at the deputies. "Did anybody bother reviewing a property map?" Neither man answered. That answer told me everything. Melissa had gotten there first. The older deputy cleared his throat. Mr. Walker, we're not here to issue citations. We just need everyone to remain cooperative while ownership questions are resolved. Ownership questions. The phrase hit me like a hammer. There were no ownership questions. My family had owned this land for decades. The deed was recorded. The boundaries were surveyed. The taxes were paid. Yet somehow I was standing on my own ranch being told my dock might belong to someone else. Melissa gave me a small smile, the kind people wear when they think they've already won. We'll be discussing formal lake management rules at the next HOA meeting. I looked past her toward the dock, toward the water, toward the property my father had spent his life protecting. Then I looked back at Melissa. For the first time, I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a claim, and if she was willing to bring sheriff deputies to my ranch over it, she wasn't planning to back down. What I didn't know yet was why. Why did the HOA suddenly believe they owned the only dock on my land? And what exactly had convinced Melissa Grant that she could take it from me? Those questions stayed with me long after the deputies left. By noon, I had my first answer. Melissa wasn't guessing. She was acting like someone who believed she already had authority. The problem was that authority had never come from me. The next morning, I drove into town for feed supplies. Before I even reached the hardware store, I spotted something that made me hit the brakes. A brand new sign stood beside the public road leading toward the western shoreline. Lake access regulations authorized by Silver Creek. Below it sat a list of boating rules, quiet hours, dock usage standards, launch procedures, community enforcement policies. I read the entire thing twice. Not once did it mention ownership. Not once did it explain where the HOA had obtained the authority to regulate any of it. But there was one sentence that caught my attention. All primary lake access facilities subject to HOA oversight. Primary lake access facilities. There was only one deepwater dock on Silver Creek Lake. Mine. Melissa wasn't just claiming the dock. She was quietly building a paper trail suggesting she'd always controlled it. That realization followed me home. By Friday afternoon, things got worse. I heard engines near my ranch gate. 3 pickup trucks sat parked beside my fence line. Boat trailers occupied ground that definitely wasn't public property. A group of HOA members unloaded coolers and fishing gear as if they were arriving at a county park. Nobody asked permission. Nobody knocked on my door. They simply acted like the land belonged to them. I walked down from the barn. One man glanced at me. "Morning." "Morning," I replied. He pointed toward the dock. "Melissa said community members can launch from there." The confidence in his voice surprised me. Not arrogance, certainty, as though someone had officially told him the matter was settled. "Melissa said that? At the meeting last week?" I nodded slowly. Then I looked toward the shoreline. People were already walking across property that had belonged to my family for decades. The stakes suddenly felt much bigger than one HOA president. Melissa was recruiting believers. That evening, I pulled several old property folders from a filing cabinet inside my office. Most came from my years as a county surveyor. Boundary maps, survey records, ownership plats. Documents most people considered boring. I considered them valuable, especially when someone started claiming land that wasn't theirs. Hours passed. Stacks of paper covered my desk. The smell of old ink and yellowed paper filled the room. Then I found something odd. A survey map from nearly 30 years earlier. One my father had marked with handwritten notes. I recognized his handwriting immediately. Short, precise, practical. A small circle appeared near the eastern shoreline, directly beside the dock. Next to it, he'd written only 3 words. Check easement route. I frowned. The notation didn't make sense. There was no easement listed anywhere on the map, at least none that I could see. I searched through the rest of the folder. Nothing. No explanation. No supporting documents. Just those 3 words. Check easement route. The next day I drove to the county records office. A clerk helped me pull archived plats related to Silver Creek Lake. Most matched what I already knew: property boundaries, subdivision maps, development filings. Then another inconsistency appeared. One of the oldest maps showed a faint access corridor running toward the lake. The corridor wasn't labeled. It simply stopped near the shoreline. Someone had later marked through part of it. The copying quality was poor, but the mark was clearly intentional. I stared at the document. Something had been removed, or hidden, and whatever it was seemed connected to the area surrounding my dock. As I left the courthouse, my phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. I opened it. The message contained a single photograph. My dock, taken from across the lake. The image looked recent. Very recent. Below it were 6 words. Community property will be reclaimed soon. No signature, no explanation. Just a threat. I looked across the lake from the courthouse parking lot. For the first time, this felt less like a neighborhood disagreement and more like a coordinated campaign. Someone wanted that dock badly. And somewhere inside my father's records was a piece of information Melissa Grant either didn't know existed or desperately hoped I would never find. Because the more I studied those old maps, the more certain I became. Something important had been hidden inside the original survey records, and whatever it was could change everything. Unfortunately, Melissa Grant wasn't waiting for me to figure it out. She was moving faster. The following Monday, I woke up to another surprise. A county vehicle sat beside my barn. An inspector was walking my fence line with a clipboard. I parked my truck and stepped out. "Can I help you?" The inspector looked embarrassed. "Received a complaint about possible shoreline code violations." I stared at him. "What violations?" He checked his paperwork. "Improper dock maintenance, potential environmental concerns, unapproved shoreline modifications." I pointed toward the dock. "The same dock that's been there for decades?" He nodded. The complaint didn't mention that. Of course it hadn't. Someone wanted government officials looking at my property. Not because anything was wrong, because investigations create pressure. The inspector spent 20 minutes reviewing everything before closing his folder. "Honestly, Mr. Walker, I don't see any issues. That should have been the end of it. Instead, it was only the beginning." 3 days later, another complaint arrived. This time regarding livestock fencing. Then another involving stormwater drainage. Then another claiming unauthorized commercial fishing activity. Each complaint required paperwork, phone calls, inspections, time. None resulted in violations. But that wasn't the point. The goal was exhaustion. Death by bureaucracy. The campaign spread beyond government offices. At Murphy's General Store, conversations stopped when I entered. People glanced away. Others pretended not to notice me. A woman who'd known my family for years suddenly became fascinated with a shelf full of motor oil rather than say hello. I didn't need anyone to explain what was happening. Melissa was talking, and people were listening. That evening, I finally saw proof. Cole Ramirez pulled into my driveway just before sunset. The retired game warden climbed out carrying a tablet. Cole wasn't the type to dramatize things, which made his expression concerning. "You need to see this." He handed me the tablet. A Facebook page filled the screen. Silver Creek Community Voices, created less than 2 weeks earlier. The first post featured a photograph of my dock. The second showed my ranch gate. The third showed my truck parked beside the shoreline. Dozens of comments followed. Most came from people I recognized. Some claimed I was trying to monopolize lake access. Others accused me of threatening property values. One post described me as an obstacle to community progress. I kept scrolling. Then I found Melissa. Her comments were careful, calculated. She never directly accused me of anything. Instead, she asked questions, raised concerns, suggested possibilities. The effect was the same. People filled in the blanks themselves. "She's running a campaign," Cole said. "I can see that. It gets worse." He pointed to another post. An aerial image of the lake appeared on screen. Someone had drawn a bright red circle around my dock. The caption read, "One property owner should not control community access." I felt anger rise in my chest, not because the statement was false, because people were starting to believe it. The next morning, I drove into town for breakfast. Halfway through my coffee, I overheard two men discussing the situation. HOA says Walker's trying to privatize the whole lake. Seriously? That's what I heard. I sat there listening. Neither man knew I was 3 booths away. Rumors were spreading faster than facts, exactly as Melissa intended. The pressure reached another level that Friday. I returned home to find a drone hovering over my property. The machine buzzed above the shoreline before drifting toward the dock. I watched it for nearly a minute, recording, photographing, documenting. When I raised my phone to film it, the drone immediately turned away. Someone didn't want to be identified. That evening, I reviewed security camera footage from around the ranch. The cameras had captured something interesting. A white SUV parked near the public road overlooking my property. Melissa's vehicle. She'd been there 3 separate times that week. Always watching. Always observing. Always gathering information. I showed the footage to Cole. He shook his head. "She's building a case." "Based on what?" "Doesn't matter. She's convincing people there is a case." That realization hit harder than any complaint. Facts weren't driving this conflict anymore. Narrative was. Melissa had successfully positioned herself as the protector of the community. And me? The obstacle. The outsider. The problem. For the first time since this started, I felt something I hadn't expected. Isolation. Not fear. Not panic. Isolation. The kind that comes when people you've known for years stop asking questions and start believing rumors. But something else bothered me even more. This campaign was too organized, too coordinated, too effective. Melissa wasn't doing all this alone. Someone was helping her. Someone with access to records, photographs, and information. As I sat in my office that night reviewing the mysterious survey maps again, my phone buzzed with a new message. The sender was unknown. The message contained only 7 words. "You're looking in the wrong place, Ethan." Attached was an old photograph of my father's barn, the abandoned section nobody had entered in years, and suddenly I knew where I needed to search next. The photograph attached to the anonymous message showed the rear storage wing of my father's old barn. Most people didn't even know it existed. The structure sat behind the main equipment shed, partially hidden by years of neglected repairs and stacked lumber. My father had always called it the records room. After he passed away, I locked it and rarely thought about it again. Now I couldn't stop thinking about it. Early the next morning, I grabbed a flashlight and headed inside. Dust covered everything. Old ranch ledgers, broken tools, boxes filled with decades of paperwork. I spent 3 hours opening containers and sorting through records. Nothing. Just when I started thinking the message had been a dead end, I noticed something unusual beneath an old workbench. A metal corner, barely visible through dirt and debris. I crouched down and cleared away the dust. A steel survey box. locked. My pulse quickened immediately. County surveyors used boxes like that to store original field records and protected legal documents. I recognized it because I'd spent years working with them. The box wasn't supposed to be there, which meant my father had hidden it intentionally. I carried it to the workbench. The lock had rusted decades earlier. 10 minutes later, I had it open. Inside sat a stack of rolled maps secured with leather straps. Beneath them were envelopes, correspondence files, and several documents bearing county seals. Every piece appeared old. Very old. The first thing I noticed was a name: Silver Creek Development Partnership, the original entity responsible for dividing and selling lakefront property nearly 60 years ago. The second thing I noticed was my father's signature. Again and again, not as a buyer, as a consultant. I sat down. Suddenly, the entire situation felt much bigger than a dock. I spent the next hour reviewing documents. Then I found something that stopped me cold. A hand-drawn plat map, far older than any version I'd seen in county archives. Unlike the public copies, this one clearly showed an access corridor leading toward the shoreline. The same corridor that appeared partially erased in the courthouse records. Only here, nothing was hidden. A note ran alongside the corridor. Private easement access, controlled by Eastern Shore owner. I read it twice, then 3 times. A second document sat underneath. County correspondence. The letter referenced long-term lake access agreements and maintenance obligations connected to the easement. The language was legal and dense, but one thing was obvious. The access route wasn't public. It never had been. I immediately called Sarah Bennett. By noon, she was sitting across from me at the kitchen table. The property attorney spent nearly an hour reviewing everything. The more she read, the quieter she became. Finally, she leaned back. "Ethan, where exactly did you find these?" "In the barn." She tapped the map. "This changes the entire case." I felt my heartbeat accelerate. "How?" "Because Melissa's argument depends on one assumption, which is that community access rights exist independently from your property." She pointed toward the easement notation. "These records suggest the opposite." I stared at the document. Sarah continued, "If this easement remained active through subsequent ownership transfers, every route leading to the dock could be tied directly to your family's property rights." I looked toward the shoreline through the kitchen window. The dock sat exactly where it always had. Yet suddenly it felt different, protected, important, potentially powerful. Sarah wasn't finished. She opened another folder from the survey box. Inside sat correspondence between county officials and original developers. One paragraph had been highlighted years earlier, apparently by my father. Sarah read it aloud. "Community lake access may be maintained only through approved easement routes established under original development agreements." She looked up. "Ethan, this language matters. Why? Because if later developments ignored these agreements, they may never have acquired lawful access in the first place." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Outside, I heard trucks moving along the road toward the western shoreline. HOA members, probably heading to the dock again, completely unaware of what sat on my kitchen table. Then another realization hit me. The anonymous message. Someone wanted me to find this. Someone knew the documents existed, and someone believed they were important enough to risk contacting me. Before I could say anything else, Sarah gathered the maps carefully. "I need to review every page. You think there's more?" She nodded. "Much more." Her eyes moved back to the easement notation. Then she gave me a look I wouldn't forget. The look attorneys get when they discover something nobody else has noticed. "If these records mean what I think they mean," she said quietly, "the HOA doesn't just lack authority over the dock." She tapped the access corridor. They may not even have a legal way to reach it. And for the first time since Melissa Grant arrived on my property with sheriff deputies, I felt something stronger than frustration. Hope. Not because I'd won. Not because the HOA had backed down, but because I finally understood something important. Melissa was fighting with assumptions. I was beginning to find facts. The problem was that facts take time. Melissa wasn't giving me any. 3 days after Sarah took the documents for review, the conflict exploded. I was repairing a section of fence near the shoreline when I heard engines approaching across the water. One boat, then another, then 3 more. By the time I reached the dock, 5 boats were moving slowly along my shoreline. Every one of them carried HOA members. Melissa stood at the front of the lead boat wearing sunglasses and holding a clipboard. A clipboard. On a lake, as though she was conducting some kind of official inspection. The boats idled within sight of my dock. Close enough to be annoying, far enough to avoid obvious violations. Melissa raised her voice. "We're documenting lake conditions for community records." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "You need 5 boats for that?" Several HOA members avoided eye contact. Others seemed uncomfortable. Melissa didn't. "We have a responsibility to protect community assets." Community assets. There was that phrase again. The boats spent nearly 2 hours circling portions of the eastern shoreline, taking photographs, recording videos, making notes. The message was obvious. They wanted me to know they were watching. That evening, I installed additional security cameras facing the lake. If Melissa wanted documentation, I could document too. The next attack arrived 48 hours later. Bright yellow flyers appeared around Silver Creek, at the marina, at the gas station, on community bulletin boards, even at Murphy's General Store. The headline read, "Protect our lake before it's too late." Below it sat a list of accusations, threats to public access, potential development risks, concerns about future lake use. Nothing directly named me. Yet every resident knew exactly who the flyer targeted. Cole Ramirez showed up that afternoon carrying one. "They're escalating." I took the paper. "They're panicking." Cole raised an eyebrow. "What makes you say that?" I pointed to the language. The accusations were becoming broader, less specific, more emotional. People resort to emotional arguments when facts become dangerous. And somewhere in those documents Sarah was reviewing, there were facts Melissa didn't want exposed. Unfortunately, Melissa wasn't finished. The following week, I received notice that the HOA had retained legal counsel. The letter arrived by certified mail. It accused me of interfering with established community access rights. It demanded immediate cooperation, and it warned of possible legal action if I refused. I read it twice, then forwarded it directly to Sarah. She called within an hour. "Don't respond." "That's reassuring. I'm serious." Her tone was calm, confident. "The letter doesn't actually cite any legal authority." "What does that mean?" "It means they're fishing." I smiled for the first time all week. Fishing. On a lake. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Sarah explained that legitimate claims usually referenced specific deeds, agreements, statutes, or easements. This letter referenced none. Instead, it relied on vague language and community expectations. That wasn't legal authority. That was pressure. Melissa's strategy was becoming clear. If she couldn't prove ownership, she'd manufacture enough conflict to force surrender. She underestimated something. I'd spent years as a surveyor. Property disputes didn't scare me. Bad paperwork did. And the more Sarah reviewed those records, the more convinced she became that Melissa's paperwork wasn't merely weak. It might not exist at all. A few days later, another development shifted the battle. A local reporter contacted me. Apparently, someone from the HOA had provided information about the ongoing dispute. The story was spreading. Melissa wanted public opinion. I wanted evidence, so I invited the reporter to the ranch. I showed him the dock, the shoreline, the survey maps. Not the critical documents. Not yet. Just enough to demonstrate that the situation was more complicated than the HOA claimed. The article that followed wasn't favorable to either side, but for the first time, it asked a dangerous question. Who actually controlled access rights around Silver Creek Lake? That question changed everything, because once people started asking questions, assumptions became liabilities, and Melissa Grant had built her entire campaign on assumptions. The next morning, my phone rang. Sarah Bennett. I could hear excitement in her voice. Not optimism, certainty. "Ethan," she said, "I finished reviewing the easement records." I sat down immediately. "What did you find?" There was a brief pause. Then she delivered the words that changed the entire fight. "I think I've figured out how every road leading to that dock was supposed to work." And suddenly, the battle over the dock was no longer about the dock. It was about every piece of land between the road and the water. The next morning, Sarah Bennett spread half a dozen maps across my kitchen table. Every version showed the same thing. Roads, property lines, lake access routes. But only the oldest documents contained the markings my father had preserved inside the survey box. Sarah pointed to a narrow corridor running from County Road 18 toward the shoreline. "This is the key. It doesn't look like much. It isn't supposed to." She slid another document beside it. A county-approved development map from decades earlier. The corridor appeared again, then another, and another, always connecting to the same location. "My dock. The original developers never created a public access road," Sarah said. "They created a private easement." I leaned forward. "And that means?" "It means someone controls it." I already knew the answer before she finished. "Your family." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The implications were enormous. But Sarah wasn't ready to move. Not yet. "We still need a complete chain of ownership." "You think Melissa knows any of this?" Sarah gave a short laugh. "If she did, she wouldn't be acting this confident." That confidence was still spreading. Over the next 2 weeks, Silver Creek Lake divided itself into camps. Some residents supported me. Others supported Melissa. Most simply chose whichever story they heard first. At Murphy's General Store, people debated property rights over coffee. At the marina, fishermen argued about lake access. At church, conversations stopped whenever certain names came up. Mine included. Melissa's included. Silver Creek had become a battlefield without anyone firing a shot. One afternoon, Cole Ramirez pulled into my driveway carrying a thick folder. "I've got something." He dropped the binder onto my porch table. The cover contained dates, photos, notes, lots of notes. "What's this?" "My Melissa Grant file." I looked up. "You have a Melissa Grant file?" Cole nodded. "Didn't start that way." As a retired game warden, Cole had spent decades documenting disputes, property complaints, access violations, boundary disagreements. Patterns mattered to him, and apparently Melissa had created plenty of them. We spent 2 hours reviewing the records: fence disputes, unauthorized HOA notices, claims involving properties outside HOA jurisdiction, letters sent to landowners who had never joined the association. The names changed. The tactics didn't. One ranch owner eventually sold his property. Another hired attorneys. A third simply stopped responding. Melissa kept pushing. Again and again. The pattern was impossible to ignore. "This isn't about the dock," Cole said. "No, it's about control." That word stayed with me. Control. The dock was simply the latest target, the most visible target, and perhaps the most valuable. The next surprise arrived from a source I never expected. Tyler Grant, Melissa's son. I recognized him from around town. Good kid, quiet, never involved in HOA politics. He approached me outside a gas station late one evening, nervous, looking over his shoulder. "Mr. Walker?" I nodded. He lowered his voice. "My mom doesn't know I'm talking to you." That got my attention immediately. Tyler hesitated before speaking. "She's been telling the board something." "What?" "That the county already confirmed the HOA owns access rights." I stared at him. "That's not true." "I know." "How do you know?" "Because I heard the county planner tell her the exact opposite." The words landed like a hammer. Not because they proved anything legally, because they revealed something else. Melissa wasn't mistaken. She'd been warned, and she'd ignored it. Tyler handed me a folded piece of paper. A meeting agenda. One item had been highlighted. Community Access Enforcement Plan. Another was circled in red ink. Emergency HOA meeting, scheduled 3 weeks away. I looked up. "What happens at this meeting?" Tyler swallowed. "She's planning something big." Then he walked away before I could ask more questions. That night I called Sarah. She listened carefully as I explained everything. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said exactly what I was thinking. "Melissa's running out of time." Meaning, people only become this aggressive when they know something is slipping away. For the first time, the balance of power felt different. Not shifted. Not yet. But changing. The evidence was growing. The contradictions were growing. And the number of people questioning Melissa's authority was growing too. The following morning, Sarah called again. This time her voice carried a level of excitement I hadn't heard before. "Ethan, I finished the ownership chain." I stood immediately. "What did you find?" "The easement never disappeared." I felt my pulse quicken. Sarah continued. "And that's not even the biggest discovery." "What is?" There was a brief pause. Then she delivered the sentence that would eventually bring the entire HOA to a standstill. "Ethan, every road leading to that dock still crosses land protected by your family's easement rights." And suddenly, Melissa Grant wasn't fighting over access to the dock. She was standing on top of a legal problem she didn't even know existed. Sarah arrived at my ranch the following afternoon, carrying a banker's box filled with copies of county records. She set everything across my dining table and immediately got to work. For the next 3 hours, we traced ownership transfers going back decades. Every sale, every subdivision, every recorded easement, every amendment. By sunset, a pattern had emerged. The original developers had created a private access system when Silver Creek Lake was first opened for residential use. Most people assumed the roads belonged to the county. They didn't. Others assumed the lake access corridor became public over time. It hadn't. The documents showed something entirely different. The easement rights had remained attached to the Eastern Shore property through every transfer of ownership. My property. My family's property. The same land Melissa had been treating like community infrastructure. Sarah highlighted a paragraph inside a recorded agreement. "Read this." I leaned closer. The language was dense, but the meaning became clear quickly. Any party seeking organized lake access through the corridor required written authorization from the easement holder. Authorization, not assumption, not HOA approval. Written authorization. I looked up. You're telling me every HOA event, every launch day, every organized use of the dock required permission? Sarah nodded. Legally? Yes. A strange silence settled over the room. For months, Melissa had acted like she controlled access. In reality, she might never have possessed the authority she claimed. Then Sarah showed me the second discovery. This one was even worse, a maintenance agreement from the original development. According to the document, anyone benefiting from the easement was required to contribute toward upkeep and liability protection. Road repairs, drainage maintenance, insurance obligations. The HOA had never paid a dime. They had been using the access system while ignoring every responsibility attached to it. The imbalance was staggering. The next morning, I met Cole Ramirez at the marina. I showed him copies of the findings. By the time he finished reading, he was shaking his head. Melissa is going to hate this, assuming she believes it. Cole laughed. Doesn't matter what she believes. He tapped the paperwork. These records were filed long before she ever arrived here. Word was already spreading. Questions were appearing throughout the community. Residents started asking why the HOA had never produced actual documentation supporting its claims. Board members began receiving uncomfortable emails. Even some HOA members were growing nervous. Then Melissa made a mistake. A big one. She posted another statement online. According to her message, the HOA had confirmed permanent authority over all major lake access facilities. Confirmed. There was just one problem. No such confirmation existed. Tyler Grant called me that evening. His voice sounded tense. My mom's preparing something. What kind of something? A big meeting. I already knew about the emergency HOA gathering, but Tyler revealed something new. She's telling people this meeting will settle everything. I frowned. Meaning she's planning to force a public vote and pressure county officials into backing her. The strategy was obvious. If Melissa couldn't win with documents, she'd try winning through public momentum. Unfortunately for her, legal rights aren't created by applause. After I hung up, Sarah called. She'd finished reviewing the final set of easement records. Ethan, she said, there's no ambiguity anymore. I sat down. What do we actually have? The complete chain. And? The easement never expired. I smiled. For the first time, there was no uncertainty in her voice. No speculation, no theory, only facts. Then she delivered the sentence that changed everything. The HOA doesn't possess legal access rights to the dock. I let that sink in. Months of accusations, months of pressure, months of public attacks, and underneath all of it sat one undeniable truth. Melissa Grant had built her entire campaign on property rights she didn't own. The only question left was what would happen when the entire community learned the truth. And with the emergency HOA meeting only days away, that moment was coming fast. The meeting was scheduled for Saturday evening at the Silver Creek Community Center. Melissa promoted it like a major public event. Flyers appeared around town. Emails flooded residents' inboxes. Social media posts urged everyone to attend. According to Melissa, the future of lake access was at stake. For once, she was right. By 6:30 that evening, the parking lot was overflowing. Pickup trucks lined the gravel shoulder. People stood outside discussing rumors before the doors even opened. Inside, every chair was occupied. Residents filled the aisles. Some supported Melissa. Some supported me. Most simply wanted answers. I arrived with Sarah Bennett. Neither of us carried anything dramatic. Just a leather briefcase containing copies of documents that had survived decades longer than the HOA itself. Melissa stood at the front of the room beside a projection screen. Confident, polished, certain. The same confidence she'd displayed when she brought sheriff deputies onto my property. Only this time the audience was much larger. The meeting began promptly. Melissa thanked everyone for attending. Then she launched into a presentation. Photographs of my dock appeared on the screen. Images of boats, maps, property lines, charts. Everything designed to support a single narrative: that I was obstructing community interests, that I was attempting to control lake access, that I represented a threat to Silver Creek's future. The presentation was skillfully assembled. I had to give her that. Half-truths mixed with assumptions, enough facts to sound credible, enough omissions to change the story. Several people nodded along. Others exchanged concerned looks. Melissa sensed momentum and pushed harder. The HOA has spent months attempting reasonable cooperation. That earned a few murmurs of approval. Unfortunately, some individuals believe personal ownership should override community interests. A photograph of my dock filled the screen again. The implication was obvious. Melissa wanted a villain, and she wanted it to be me. 20 minutes later, she concluded her presentation to scattered applause. Then she smiled, the smile of someone who believed the hard part was over. "Before we discuss next steps," she said, "I'd like to offer Mr. Walker an opportunity to respond." The room turned toward me. Sarah gave a slight nod, the signal we'd discussed beforehand. I stood, picked up my briefcase, and walked slowly to the front. The room became very quiet. Melissa folded her arms, waiting, confident. I opened the briefcase, removed a single document, then another, and another. No dramatic speech, no anger, no accusations, just paperwork. The kind that wins property disputes. I placed the first map beneath the projector, an enlarged copy of the original development plat. Murmurs immediately spread through the room. Most residents had never seen it before. I pointed toward the access corridor. This document was recorded before any current subdivision existed. Melissa's smile faded slightly. I continued. It identifies the access route used to reach the lake. Several residents leaned forward. Then I placed the second document on display. The easement agreement. Sarah stepped beside me. Her voice remained calm, professional. This agreement established the legal framework for lake access. She pointed toward the relevant language. Control remained with the Eastern Shore property owner. More murmurs. A few people looked directly at Melissa. The confidence on her face began to crack. Still, she tried to interrupt. "Those records are outdated," Sarah immediately responded. "We verified the ownership chain through county filings." Silence. The room felt different now, less emotional, more focused, exactly where we wanted it. Then I introduced the final piece, the maintenance agreement, the document nobody expected. I explained that use of the access corridor came with obligations, costs, responsibilities, requirements, ones that had never been fulfilled. The room fell completely silent. For the first time all evening, Melissa looked uncertain. Not angry, uncertain, because she was hearing facts she couldn't explain away. Then a resident stood. "Are you saying the HOA never actually controlled the access route?" Before I could answer, Sarah did. "The documents indicate the HOA never possessed legal authority over it." The question triggered another, then another, then another. The audience shifted from listening to Melissa to questioning Melissa. And that was when I knew the balance of power had finally changed. Because once people start asking questions, narratives stop working. Facts take over. The meeting wasn't over yet. Far from it. But for the first time since this conflict began, Melissa Grant looked like someone realizing she had built her entire argument on ground that was about to disappear beneath her feet. And the biggest revelation was still coming. The room remained silent as Sarah Bennett reached into our briefcase and removed one final document. Unlike the maps and easement records, this one carried recent county certification stamps. Fresh, verified, impossible to dismiss as outdated history. Sarah handed copies to several HOA board members seated near the front. Then she turned toward the crowd. Over the past month, we've completed a full ownership chain review. Melissa immediately stood. This is irrelevant. No, Sarah replied calmly. This is the entire issue. The room grew quiet again. Sarah pointed toward a diagram projected onto the screen. The image showed Silver Creek Lake, the dock, the surrounding roads, every route residents used to reach the water. Then she highlighted one section in red, the access corridor, the same corridor referenced in the original development agreements, the same corridor Melissa had ignored. For decades, Sarah said, everyone assumed these roads provided public lake access. She paused. The records show otherwise. Several people exchanged confused looks. Then Sarah delivered the sentence that changed everything. Every legal route leading to the dock crosses land protected by the Walker family easement. The room erupted. Questions came immediately. What does that mean? Can that be true? How did nobody know this? Melissa tried to regain control. That interpretation is disputed. No, a voice answered from the back. Everyone turned. Judge Harold Pierce stepped forward. The retired county judge had attended quietly without saying a word all evening. Now every eye in the room followed him. Judge Pierce accepted a copy of the documents and adjusted his glasses. I reviewed these records yesterday. The room became completely silent. Melissa's face lost color. Judge Pierce continued. The easement language is straightforward. He tapped the certified ownership chain. The access rights never transferred. A resident raised his hand. So who controls them? Judge Pierce looked directly at me. Ethan Walker. The reaction was immediate. Gasps, murmurs, whispers spreading through the room. Months of assumptions collapsed in seconds. Melissa attempted one final defense. Even if that's true, the community has used those roads for years. Sarah nodded. They have, and that establishes access. No. The single word landed like a hammer. Sarah pointed toward the documents. Usage does not override recorded property rights. Then she revealed the final piece, the one nobody expected. The HOA had never received written authorization to organize lake access activities. Not once. Not for boat launches. Not for community events. Not for HOA patrols. Not for any of the activities Melissa had spent months enforcing. Every major action she'd taken rested on authority she didn't possess. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then a board member stood. You told us the county approved all this. Melissa froze. Another board member joined in. You said legal review had already happened. A third looked down at the certified documents. We based decisions on that information. The questions started coming faster. Melissa couldn't answer them. Not because she didn't want to, because there were no answers. Facts had replaced assumptions, and facts were winning. The meeting ended in chaos. Not angry chaos, confused chaos. People wanted explanations. Board members wanted records. Residents wanted to know how something this important had been overlooked. Melissa left through a side exit before most of them could reach her. By sunrise the next morning, Silver Creek Lake woke up to a very different reality. I stood beside the old ranch entrance road carrying a chain and lock. Cole Ramirez stood nearby, not because I needed help, because he wanted to witness history. Neither of us spoke much. The documents had already spoken. The chain slid through the gate. The lock clicked shut. Simple, legal, final. A new sign hung beside it. Private easement access. Authorized use only. Nothing dramatic, just the truth. By mid-morning, trucks started arriving. Boat owners, residents, visitors. Everyone stopped at the same place. The gate. The same gate they had driven through for years without question. Phones started ringing across the lake. The marina received calls. The HOA received calls. Board members received calls. People wanted answers. For the first time, they weren't asking me. They were asking Melissa. By noon, social media exploded. Photos of the locked gate spread across Silver Creek. Arguments erupted online. Some blamed me. Most wanted to know why the HOA had never verified ownership before claiming authority. That question spread faster than any rumor Melissa had ever started. And unlike rumors, this one came with documents. For months, Melissa Grant had acted as if she controlled access to the lake. Now everyone could see the truth. She never controlled it at all. And with the gate locked, the entire community was about to discover exactly how much power she had been pretending to possess. The first 48 hours were chaos. Not because anyone was angry at me, because nobody had expected the gate to matter. For years, residents had driven straight through the easement road without thinking about it. Boat trailers rolled down to the dock. Fishing tournaments launched from the shoreline. Weekend visitors treated the access route like public infrastructure. Now it was closed. And suddenly, everyone realized how important it had been. My phone rang constantly. Some callers were frustrated. Others were confused. Most simply wanted to understand what had happened. For the first time since this fight began, people were asking questions instead of making assumptions. The answers all pointed to the same place. The HOA. 3 days after the gate closed, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. This time I wasn't invited. I didn't need to be. By evening, half the town already knew what had happened. Board members had demanded documentation, financial records, legal opinions, meeting minutes, everything connected to Melissa's campaign. What they discovered made matters worse. There had never been a formal legal review. No property rights opinion, no easement verification, no county confirmation. Many of the claims Melissa had repeated for months were based entirely on her own interpretations. The board felt blindsided. Residents felt misled. The trust she'd spent years building disappeared almost overnight. The next morning, Tyler Grant called. His voice sounded exhausted. She resigned. I sat quietly. Despite everything, hearing it felt strange. Officially, effective immediately. The silence that followed carried more weight than I expected. For months, Melissa had been the center of every conflict, every complaint, every accusation, every escalation. Now she was gone. Not defeated by insults, not defeated by intimidation, defeated by records. Tyler cleared his throat. The board wants to talk to you. That meeting happened 2 days later. A new HOA leadership team sat across from me at the community center. The atmosphere was completely different. No presentations, no accusations, no threats, just adults trying to solve a problem. One board member slid a folder across the table. We'd like to negotiate. I opened it. Inside was a proposal. Recognition of the easement. Recognition of the dock's ownership. Recognition of the property's legal boundaries. For the first time, every major fact was acknowledged. The board president looked at me carefully. What do you want, Ethan? The answer surprised some people. Because I didn't want revenge. I didn't want penalties. I didn't want lawsuits. I wanted something my father had always valued. Respect. People should still be able to enjoy the lake, I said. A few heads nodded. but they need to do it honestly. Over the next several weeks, attorneys finalized a new agreement. Residents received lawful access through a managed use arrangement. Maintenance costs would be shared. Insurance obligations would be shared. Property boundaries would be respected, and no future HOA board could claim authority over private land without documented legal review. The agreement passed unanimously, not because everyone liked it, because everyone understood it. The conflict that had divided Silver Creek finally ended. Spring arrived a few months later. The dock looked exactly the same. The lake looked exactly the same. Yet everything felt different. One Saturday morning, I stood at the shoreline watching families fish from the dock. Children laughed as they tried to cast lines. Neighbors shared coffee. Boats launched in an orderly line. No arguments, no confrontations, no HOA patrols, just people enjoying the lake. Cole Ramirez walked over carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed me one. Funny how this turned out. I smiled. How's that? Melissa spent months trying to control the dock. He gestured toward the water. And now more people are using it than ever. He wasn't wrong. The difference was simple. The access came through cooperation instead of control. A few weeks later, the community dedicated a small plaque near the dock entrance. Nothing fancy. Just a reminder of the agreement that protected both property rights and public access. When I read it for the first time, I thought about my father. The survey box, the forgotten records, the easement nobody remembered. He'd protected something important without ever knowing this fight would happen. And in the end, those documents did exactly what they were supposed to do. They preserved the truth. As the sun rose over Silver Creek Lake, I stood at the end of the dock and watched the water ripple across the shoreline my family had protected for generations. The lake belonged to everyone who respected it. But the rights attached to the land still mattered. They always would, because the strongest fence isn't built from wood or steel. It's built from knowing your rights before someone else tries to take them.
And if there's one lesson this whole story taught me, it's that assumption can drive fast, but facts last a whole lot longer. For months, people argue about who's controlled that dock, who had authority, and who was right. In the end, none of it came down to rumors, rather, or popularity. It came down to own recourse, document, agreement, and the patience to look for the truth before reacting. That's something worth remembering, whether you are dealing with land, family matter, business, or simply disagreements with neighbor. There's also quite kind of trend in standing your ground without turning every conflict into a fight. Ethan didn't reserve his family legacy by shouting louder than everyone else. He did by standing calm, gathering facts, and letting the truth speak for itself. Sometimes dignity isn't about winning. Sometimes it's about protecting what's yours while leaving room for others to move forward with you. Now I'd love to hear from you. If you ever had to stand up for something you knew was right, type yes in the comments. And if you ever deal with an HOA, a property dispute, or a neighbor disagreement, share your story below. I read as many of them as I can, and they are often just as interesting as the story we tell here. And if you enjoyed this HOA, range, lake, and property right story, go ahead and subscribe. We'll be glad to have you along for the next story of perseverance, common sense, and quiet courage.